Get him out of here. People like him don't belong at tables like this. Eleanor Hargrove's voice carried across the entire ballroom of the Worthington Hotel in Houston. Her diamond earrings caught the chandelier light as she lifted her glass of Burgundy above Marcus Webb's head with the casual certainty of a woman who had never once faced a consequence for anything she had ever done. The wine came down in a slow red arc. 300 guests went completely silent. Marcus sat perfectly still as the liquid soaked through his decorated military jacket. Then he did something no one expected. He smiled. That smile was about to cost Eleanor Hargrove everything she had ever owned. Let's go back 18 hours to understand exactly how we arrived at this moment. The Gulf Coast Defense Innovation Summit was the most coveted invitation in the Houston business calendar. $1,000 per seat, held annually at the Worthington Hotel's Grand Ballroom. It was the room where billion-dollar contracts were whispered into existence over champagne and handshakes. The chandeliers alone cost more than most people's houses. The guest list was a who's who of defense contractors, military brass, technology executives, and the particular species of old money that had been feeding off government contracts since the Cold War. Eleanor Hargrove swept into the room at 7:15 in the evening as though she owned the floor beneath her heels. In many ways, she did. Her family, the Hargroves of Galveston, had been in the defense business for 60 years. Her grandfather had supplied communications equipment to the Korean War effort. Her father had built Hargrove Defense Systems into a $2 billion enterprise by the time Eleanor was in college. Now her husband, Robert Hargrove, served as CEO while Eleanor occupied the more powerful and unelected position of company identity. She was the face that donors trusted, the smile that smoothed over boardroom friction, the name on every charitable gala invitation in the state of Texas. Tonight, however, Hargrove Defense Systems was not in a position of strength. 3 major contracts had collapsed in the prior 12 months. The Department of Defense was redirecting its priorities toward next-generation autonomous systems, artificial intelligence integration, and cyber warfare capabilities. Companies like Hargrove that had built their reputation on legacy hardware were finding themselves politely but firmly moved toward the edges of the conversation. Robert had told Eleanor in the car on the way to the venue that the Sentinel UAV contract, an autonomous surveillance and strike system worth approximately $1.4 billion, was their last realistic lifeline for the next 3 years. Eleanor had nodded, touched up her lipstick, and said nothing. She had her own assessment of how the evening would go. The Hargrove name still meant something in this room. It had always meant something. That was not going to change because some Pentagon committee had decided to chase the latest technology trend. Within the first 40 minutes of the evening, Eleanor had already made 3 people quietly miserable. She sent a glass of mineral water back to a young black server because, as she announced loud enough for nearby tables to hear, the ice was the wrong size. She interrupted a Latina engineer from a competing firm mid-sentence during a networking exchange to suggest she might be more comfortable near the catering tables. And when a young black veteran in a civilian suit tried to introduce himself near the silent auction display, Eleanor looked past him without acknowledgement as though he were part of the decor. She did not notice any of this. That was the most honest description of the situation. Eleanor Hargrove did not experience these moments as cruelty because she did not experience the people she directed them at as fully present human beings. They were atmospheric, background detail, the wrong kind of furniture. At 8:40 in the evening, Marcus Webb entered the ballroom. He moved quietly for a man of his bearing. Tall, composed, his posture the kind that comes not from a personal trainer, but from 26 years of military discipline. His dress uniform was immaculate, the ribbons above his chest pocket arranged with geometric precision. People who knew who he was greeted him with. Genuine warmth, the kind that has nothing to do with networking and everything to do with earned respect. People who did not know who he was still felt it. The way you feel the specific gravity of a room when someone enters who has actually been tested by the world. Eleanor noticed him from across the room and felt immediately, unreasonably, offended. He was sitting at table 9, the VIP cluster, surrounded by 2 senior Pentagon officials, a retired 4-star general named Douglas Whitfield, and a deputy Secretary of Defense for acquisition. Eleanor watched him engage with this group, and something tightened in her jaw that she would have described as concern for. Proper decorum if anyone had asked. Robert. She put her hand on her husband's arm. Who was that man at table 9? The one in uniform. Robert squinted across the room. I have no idea. Looks military. High-ranking, by the look of those decorations. He's sitting with Crawford and the deputy secretary. Eleanor's voice was measured, but her eyes were not. Someone should confirm he has the right. Invitation. Eleanor, please. Not tonight. We cannot afford any kind of incident before the contract announcement tomorrow. But Eleanor was already calculating. The man at table 9 was comfortable in a way that irritated her. He was not performing comfort, not working the room, not angling for position. He simply was. And in Eleanor Hargrove's experience, that particular quality of ease was a privilege that belonged to people who had earned it through a very specific and historically narrow set of circumstances. He had not earned it the right way. She was certain of this. She was wrong about nearly everything she would decide in the next 30 minutes. The formal dinner concluded at 9:45. As guests moved from their tables toward the cocktail reception space, Eleanor positioned herself near table 9 and waited when Marcus stepped away from his conversation to refill his water glass at a nearby station. She moved toward him with the practiced efficiency of a woman who had been maneuvering through social situations since the age of 7. Excuse me. Her voice was bright and brittle. I don't believe we've been properly introduced. I'm Eleanor Hargrove. Hargrove Defense Systems. Marcus turned toward her. His expression was open, professional, entirely unhurried. General Marcus Webb. Good evening, Mrs. Hargrove. The title did not register. Or more precisely, Eleanor heard it and processed. It is a social performance rather than a factual statement. I couldn't help noticing you with the Pentagon delegation. It's wonderful that the Armed Services has such robust diversity programs these days. She paused for effect. It must open up so many opportunities for people who might not otherwise have access to events at this level. The surrounding conversation slowed. Several nearby guests turned almost imperceptibly the way people do when they sense something is about to go wrong. Marcus studied her for a moment with the calm regard of someone who has had this conversation in 100 different forms across 100 different rooms his entire adult life. I'm here in my capacity as commander of the Defense Innovation Unit Southern Region, he said simply. We're conducting contractor assessments for the Sentinel program. Your company is one of the firms under consideration. Eleanor's smile remained precisely in place while something shifted behind it. The Defense Innovation Unit. She knew the name. The DIU was the Pentagon's forward deployed contracting arm, the group responsible for identifying and funding the next generation of defense technology. Whoever ran their regional assessment controlled access to programs worth billions. But she had already committed to a position, and Eleanor Hargrove had never been built for the kind of internal recalibration that the moment required. That's very impressive, she said, and the condescension in her voice had sharpened to something uglier. I imagine the DIU has found it very valuable to include community voices in their processes. It must give them excellent optics. She turned briefly to the woman standing beside her, a longtime family friend named Cecilia, and added with a small laugh, You have to respect how Seriously, they're taking the representation initiatives. Even out here, the surrounding silence had become complete. Marcus set down his water glass. He did not raise his voice. He did not change his posture. He simply looked at Eleanor Hargrove the way a person looks at something they're memorizing. Mrs. Hargrove, he said, I enlisted as a private in 1998. I served 4 tours of combat deployment across 2 theaters. I earned my commission in the field. I hold advanced degrees from West Point and the National War College. I have been assessed, decorated, and promoted by every military authority available to this country. And I have personally approved or declined every major defense technology contract in this region for the last 6 years. He paused. Is there something else you'd like to know about my qualifications? The room was listening. Every word had been heard by the 2 Pentagon officials. Still seated at table 9, by Douglas Whitfield, by the Deputy Secretary, by the 3 tech executives standing 12 feet away, and by the phones that had emerged from jacket pockets with the quiet efficiency of a tide coming in. Eleanor's jaw tightened. What she felt in that moment was not embarrassment. It was something worse. It was the specific fury of a person who has been corrected in public and who has never developed any internal architecture for handling that experience. She reached for her wine glass, the one she had been carrying since she left table 6, and something in her simply refused to do the sensible thing. You people, she said, you actually believe you've earned your way into rooms like this. The wine glass tilted. The Burgundy left the glass in a single, slow wave and came down over Marcus Webb's head, over his decorated uniform, over the ribbons that marked combat service in places Eleanor Hargrove had never thought about for a single day of her sheltered life. Get him out of here, she announced to the room. People like him don't belong at tables like this. 300 people watched Marcus Webb reach into his jacket pocket, remove a pressed white handkerchief, and begin to methodically clean the wine from his face. He did not summon security. He did not raise his voice. He said only this, Mrs. Hargrove, I've seen what I needed to see. Then he returned to his table. The room did not move for almost 10 full seconds. Robert Hargrove stood 20 feet away with the expression of a man watching a building fall. The phones were already uploading. By 6 the following morning, the video had been viewed 11 million times. The footage was devastatingly clear. The angle from at least 3 separate phones captured the wine, the uniform decorations, the words, the smile that followed. Eleanor's face was identifiable in every frame. By 7 in the morning, the phrase Hargrove wine incident was the top trending search term in the country. By 8, CNN had run the footage twice in the first half hour of their morning broadcast. Eleanor, apparently advised by no one capable of stopping her, posted to her personal social media at 2 in the morning. The statement read, I will not apologize for defending the standards that have made this industry great. Real achievement doesn't require special accommodations. Real Americans understand the difference. The response was not what she had anticipated. By 9 in the morning, Hargrove Defense Systems had lost 14% of its stock value in pre-market trading. Robert's phone contained 17 messages from board members, each one a variation on the same 4 words. What has she done? Robert's assistant placed a research file on his desk at 9:30. Marcus Webb. His search had taken approximately 4 minutes because the information was entirely public record. General Marcus Webb, United States Army, 2 stars, Commander of the Defense Innovation Unit Southern Region, recipient of the Silver Star, the Distinguished Service Medal, and 3 Bronze Stars with Combat Distinction. Personal authority over the Sentinel UAV contract selection. Final recommendation to be submitted to the Deputy Secretary of Defense by the following Friday. Robert read the file twice. Then he walked to the window of his office and stood there for a very long time looking at nothing. The call from the Pentagon came at 10:15. Not from a liaison, not from an assistant, from Colonel Patricia Donnelly of the Office of Defense Procurement. Integrity. Mr. Hargrove, we're scheduling an urgent review of Hargrove Defense Systems. Contractor status in light of last evening's incident. Please bring your legal team. 2 o'clock. Pentagon Annex, Houston Field Office. This is not a request. Robert arrived at 2 o'clock. Marcus Webb was already seated at the head of the table in full dress uniform, the burgundy-stained jacket conspicuously not what he was wearing. Please sit down, Mr. Hargrove. Marcus's voice carried no anger. That was in some ways the most devastating thing about the meeting. There was no personal score to settle here. There is only institutional judgment. I want to be direct with you about what happened and what happens next. Robert sat. Last night was not a personal incident. It was a character assessment. We conduct them deliberately at events like this because the relationships we build with contractors extend to how those contractors treat their own employees, their subcontractors, the people who work beneath them. Culture flows from leadership. It always does. Marcus placed a tablet on the table, showing a series of documents. We've been reviewing Hargrove Defense Systems' internal records as part of the standard Sentinel vetting process. What we found before last night was already a concern. 2 discrimination settlements in the last 4 years. A pattern of minority employee attrition that significantly exceeds industry average. Leadership demographics that have not changed meaningfully in 20 years. Robert felt the walls of the room pressing inward. Your company was on our consideration list, Mr. Hargrove. Your technical specifications for the Sentinel program were genuinely strong. But we were already troubled by what the internal data suggested about your culture. Last night removed any remaining uncertainty. General, my wife does not speak for the company. She has no operational role. She is the primary shareholder's spouse. She sits on your charitable foundation board, and she represents your family's name in every public context. 300. People watch her pour wine on a uniformed general while using language that has not been acceptable in this country for 60 years. And this morning she posted a statement defending those actions. Marcus folded his hands. That is your company's culture, Mr. Hargrove. Not because of one incident. Because of what one incident reveals. The Sentinel contract had been awarded that morning to a competitor. 1 point for $1 billion. Gone. Furthermore, a comprehensive review of all existing Hargrove Defense Systems contracts had been initiated. Any evidence of discriminatory employment practices would result in immediate termination of those agreements. Robert drove home in silence. He found Eleanor in the living room with her lawyer and a media consultant who had been hired, apparently, to manage the narrative. She was rehearsing, talking points about merit-based standards and the weaponization of social media against traditional values. She looked up when Robert entered with the expression of a woman who expected support. Robert sent the lawyer and the consultant home. What followed was not the kind of argument that resolves in an evening. It was the kind of conversation that breaks something permanently. Robert had spent 22 years building a company. He had made compromises. He had looked away from things he should not have looked away from. He had allowed a culture to exist inside Hargrove Defense Systems that was not the culture he told himself he was running. And he had allowed his wife to be, in public and in private, the most visible expression of that culture, because challenging her had always cost more than accommodating her. That calculation had just produced a bill of $1.4 billion and the potential collapse of 60 years of institutional work. I'm filing for divorce, he said. Eleanor stared at him. I should have said that 5 years ago, maybe 10, but I'm saying it now. He picked up his phone and called the board chairman before Eleanor had formed a response. The emergency board meeting convened at 8 the following morning. Eleanor's father, Winston Carroll, the company's founder and majority shareholder, sat at the head of the table. He was 74 years old, built by decades of hard negotiation and he had watched the footage 4 times before arriving. He looked at his daughter across the table and said simply, "Explain it to me." Eleanor tried the version she had been rehearsing. Standards, merit, the overreaction of the media, the way successful women were targeted. Winston Carroll let her finish. Then he said, "The man you poured wine on holds 2 graduate degrees for combat decorations and personal authority over more government spending than our entire company has generated in its history. And you call them a diversity quota in front of 300 cameras." Silence. "You've been doing this your whole life," Winston continued. "To servers, to employees, to anyone you decided didn't meet your standard. We've been managing the damage quietly because you were family. We are done managing it quietly." By resolution of the board, Eleanor was removed from all positions and affiliations with Hargrove Defense Systems effective immediately. Her trust distributions were suspended pending a full legal review of the financial damage her actions had caused. The company issued a public statement that named the actions directly rather than softening them, acknowledged the pattern the internal reviews had uncovered, and committed to an independently overseen cultural transformation program. It was the most honest statement Hargrove Defense Systems had ever released. Robert would spend the following 18 months rebuilding not just the company's external reputation, but its internal reality. New leadership was recruited from a wider and more genuinely qualified pool. The employment practices that had produced those discrimination settlements were dismantled and replaced. An external civil rights organization was brought in to audit the entire operation. The work was slow and expensive and in many ways humbling for a man who had told himself for years that he ran a good company. He did not always enjoy what the audit revealed, but he did the work. Marcus Webb used the momentum of what the incident had generated to advance something he had been pushing for inside the Pentagon for years: a formal character and culture assessment protocol that would apply to all major defense contractors, not as an afterthought, but as a primary evaluation criterion equal in weight to technical and financial qualifications. The proposal passed. 12 federal agencies adopted variations of the same framework within the following year. Companies across the defense sector began examining their own cultures not because they had suddenly become righteous, but because the consequences of getting it wrong had become unmistakably real. Eleanor's story did not end with the board meeting. She spent 4 months in a very small apartment, separated from the infrastructure of wealth and position that had been her entire environment since birth. The court-supervised community service began in February. 200 hours at the Galveston Veteran Transition Center, a nonprofit that helped homeless and struggling veterans reintegrate into civilian life. Her first week was essentially an exercise in sustained discomfort. She did not know how to fill coffee thermoses. She did not know how to organize donation, intake, or run a job application workshop. She sat across tables from men and women who had done things she could not have survived, who were navigating bureaucracy and trauma and poverty with a grace that made her own grievances feel very small. One of the regulars at the center was a man named Dennis, a 61-year-old black veteran who had served 2 tours in Iraq and come home to a country that had not quite figured out what to do with him. He had been coming to the center for 3 years. He knew where everything was. He helped new volunteers without being asked. Dennis never asked Eleanor about the video. Most of the people at the center knew who she was. None of them brought it up. One Tuesday in April, after Eleanor had spent 3 hours helping a young veteran named Claire prepare for a job interview at a logistics firm, Claire turned to her and said, "Thank you. You really helped." And Eleanor understood in the straightforward and unambiguous way that direct experience produces understanding, that this was the first time in years she had helped someone who had nothing to offer her in return. She came back the following Tuesday. not because of community service hours, because Dennis had asked if she could help run the Wednesday application workshop, and she had said yes before she had fully thought about it. Marcus Webb heard about this through a mutual contact. He did not seek Eleanor out. He did not offer forgiveness as a transaction. He simply noted it the way a person notes information that is true and moved on to the next thing that needed his attention, because that was the work, not the single confrontation in a ballroom, not the viral moment or the contract lost or the marriage ended. The work was the quiet, sustained effort of the morning after and the morning after that and every morning after until the institution was different enough to produce different outcomes. Marcus had been doing that work his entire career. He expected to keep doing it. He did not need anyone to apologize for being willing to start. 1 year after the incident at the Worthington Hotel, Hargrove Defense Systems had recovered enough credibility to be included in a new round of contractor evaluations. Their internal demographics had shifted significantly. Their discrimination complaint rate had fallen to near zero. The independent oversight organization issued a report that was measured and honest and suggested the transformation was real rather than cosmetic. Robert read the report alone in his office on a Tuesday afternoon. He thought about the 22 years of decisions that had preceded it. He thought about the night in the Worthington ballroom, the moment the wine left the glass, the smile on Marcus Webb's face. He thought about what it cost to see something clearly and what it cost not to. Then he put the report in his drawer and went back to work. Because that is what rebuilding looks like. Not a single dramatic moment of redemption. Not a press conference or a corporate statement or a viral video of someone doing better. Just the daily, unglamorous decision to choose differently. To be honest about what you built and what it requires to build something better. To treat the human beings inside your institution as the institution itself. Character, as Marcus Webb had said in a dozen subsequent interviews that year, is not what you perform for 300 cameras. It is what you do when you believe no one important is watching. And the most reliable way to know what kind of organization you actually are is to ask the people inside it who have the least power to protect themselves from your worst impulses. They have always known. They have been waiting for someone to ask. Thank you for following this story. Let us know in the comments below what you took from it. If this story has moved you and you would like to stand with us in bringing more voices of truth and hope to light, please consider supporting our work. Even the smallest gift helps us continue creating and sharing these powerful stories. You can find the donate link in the description. And of course, do not forget to subscribe so you will not miss the next chapter we are preparing for you.